practicing compassion. We really want to try to look at this in two separate ways. First, just in terms of the values and the vision that goes with that, and then a little bit later we're going to look at some more practical applications in terms of how one does it in the day-to-day work of people who come into the Salvation Army looking for help. And we start with really trying to define what compassion is. And one of the definitions that I like, it's a deep awareness of the suffering of others that's coupled with the desire to relieve the suffering. Sympathy sees and says, I'm sorry, and compassion sees and says, I'll help. What can we do about it? What I'm going to do is to talk about practicing compassion in the sense of treating those seeking help with dignity, about identifying and building on strengths, and then on respecting client self-determination. Those individually, and then a little bit in terms of the way in which they're connected. Treating people with dignity. I think a lot of it is we see individuals as more than their circumstances. A person who's struggling with alcohol addiction is more than an alcoholic. An individual without a place to live is more than part of a large group of people that get called the homeless. And to treat people with dignity really means that we're treating them as more than the sum of their woes, the problems, the issues that brought them into the Salvation Army at the same time, as important persons just because they're human. It's especially important to treat those coming to the Army for help because, one, for some people, it's difficult and shameful to ask for help, and those coming in to help are often sensitive to the way they're treated. I remember when I first started doing social service work, and this was with a nonprofit organization. I was in my early 20s, and it was a settlement house that did lots of different things, including some emergency help. As a new worker, I got really upset with people who would wait till 4:30 on Friday afternoon to come in for help. I was young, I was single, I wanted the week to be over, I wanted to be going out with friends. And the problem also, if somebody shows up at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, is that the people that you normally want to talk to help people aren't around anymore because they've left for the weekend. And it took me a while to realize that often these were people who hadn't been putting things off. They had probably been struggling, often have been struggling for a day or two with the need to come in for help, but it was hard to do that. And so they waited till the last possible moment, hoping that somehow, help or hope would arrive, and then when it wouldn't. I also think that some people are more sensitive or more aware of slights than others. When I talk with new workers, I say one of the disadvantages of doing social service work with people that are homeless, with people that are living on the edge, is that almost all of them have had a negative encounter with some social service professional that looked a lot like you. So they come in and they kind of expect to be treated without much dignity, without much respect. When we treat people with dignity, we're reinforcing their sense of themselves as worthwhile people. And we need to remember, because often or occasionally workers don't get treated with much respect or dignity either, that sometimes when clients or people coming in act in ways that are self-defeating, they may be demonstrating this is the little bit of a power they've got. Or it may be, if this is somebody that you've had contact with before or someone who's had positive interactions with the Salvation Army, this may be the place where people feel safe enough to get angry, that if they do it someplace else, they may feel like there are more repercussions. Doesn't make it easy, but that may be the case. I really think that when people come to the Salvation Army for help, there are two things that can happen. They happen to want or need something for which they're eligible and it's available, their needs can be addressed. And regardless of that, they can be treated with dignity as a person of value. That's a very good thing anyway, regardless of whether or not people's need can be met, because that happens far too infrequently in people's lives. I was talking about this with a group of Salvation Army officers a couple of years ago, and one of them said, when everybody comes in, I try to see the face of Jesus in that person. Sometimes it's easier than others, but it's there. This is a person that is important in God's eyes, in our eyes. Focusing on the strengths that people have, we realize that it's easy to equate a person with their diagnosis or label. A person with schizophrenia is seen only in terms of that condition. not their abilities and or potential. Family that's homeless is seen as dysfunctional, while in reality the parent or parents may have just done amazing things to keep that family together in spite of lots of obstacles. You know, we can assume that the human condition is relatively uniform, consistent, predictable. You know, however, you know, people change. All of us have experience with the 14, 15, 16-year-old that was always in trouble and maybe by the skin of their teeth managed to graduate from high school. And then you run into that person at 24 or 25 and they're talking about being married and the job they've got or the small business they've started, and you know the DNA is the same, but it just doesn't seem like the same person. The people grow up at different rates, you know, sometimes at 25, 35, 45, sometimes not at all. But people really hit the level of maturity at different times. Individuals with addictions can stay clean and sober for the rest of their lives. People coming to see you with serious problems may have been much more competent, much more successful at other points in their lives. Because you only see people generally when they're at their worst. And if you assume that's the way they've always been, you may have missed some things that are important. It's one of the reasons why understanding a person's past and their story is really important. I think it's almost always natural to focus on what's wrong. We remember criticisms of ourselves much longer or more vividly than we remember praise. I did a training session a few years ago. This was something I was doing around homelessness, and people were writing nice things at the end of it when they did evaluations. And somebody wrote, "I've just wasted 6 hours of my life and I'll never get it back." Now, that's all I remember. I don't even remember where I was or what I was doing. But we tend to remember the things that are negative that many of us have really been socialized, parents, families, etc., to pay attention to what's wrong, to our defects. And this may be especially true for people who grew up without much verbal support, who often, when they're working, they're in jobs that are very much just jobs, not careers, don't get much praise for what they're doing. Often if they're in relationships, the relationships may be tension-filled. So they don't get a lot of good news about what's going on. I think it's important for workers to be able to claim their own strengths, one for themselves, but also then in terms of being able to do it for others.